Over the course of the past several weeks, we've been having some conversation about what it looks like to cross the divides that we're facing. Theological, ideological, political divides that are tearing at the fabric of our country, our communities, our churches, and even our families. We've come together to talk about the ways that we as a church and as individual Christians can step into that brokenness and bring some healing. We started the journey just by laying a foundation. You know, there are some out there who argue that it's not the church's place to get into conversations about ideologies that lead to politics and policy and all those kinds of things that are tearing us apart, that the church should stick to theology alone, and that's the church's call, and we should stay out of that other stuff. But the reality is that other stuff is causing a lot of hurt and pain. And if the church's vision and ministry is to step into brokenness and bring healing and hope and wholeness into the world, then we have no option but to step into that. And I have always argued that the church and the gospel has a powerful voice to make in every aspect of our life. And while this church in particular would never tell you how to vote or which policies or politicians to support, the gospel has something to say about all of these things. And the church's role is to help you hear what's in Scripture and what's in our theological tradition. And so we just spent a couple weeks talking about that foundation and how we have a responsibility as a church to have conversations about these very things. After we set the foundation for our conversation, we talked about some steps, some things, just a few things that are really important for churches and individuals to keep in mind as we try to cross the divide. The first thing was that relationships matter. That if we're going to work together to cross those divides and bring our polarized groups back in communion with one another, we've got to have relationships. We talked about the fact that truth matters. That it's important to know the truth and to get at the truth, and that facts matter. We talked about how words matter. How we speak and how we talk about each other, especially those with whom we disagree, it matters. And as Christians, we have a responsibility to speak even with those with whom we have most vehement disagreements, with respect and dignity and love. Last week we talked about grace and how important grace is in all of this. I mean, we've worked hard over the last 6 weeks. We've given you lots of resources to read. We've had some difficult conversations. I've had more than one person express to me that they've been challenged in the midst of this, and I've been challenged. There's some things that I need to correct when it comes to this stuff. I'm on the journey. I never preach a sermon that I don't need to hear. I don't have this perfect yet. I slip up. I still say and do things toward people on the other side that I regret. I've got some learning to do as well. We've worked hard. We've talked about it. We've just been real and vulnerable and honest and humble. Well, today we're going to wrap up this series by just talking about hope. Because as much as relationships and truth and words and grace, as much as any of those things, as much as anything else, hope matters. And as we go through these struggles and as we work in the midst of these things that are kind of pulling at us right now, I think it's important that we have hope and that we hold on to hope. And so today, rather than work real hard, I want to celebrate. And the way that I want to celebrate is I just want to share with you some stories. Just stories that have given me hope in the midst of the divisions that surround us each and every day, the things that we're working hard to make a difference in. Just some stories. Then I'm going to talk about how we as a church are going to continue our work and our story moving forward. And then I'm going to give you a biblical passage just to think about. A passage that gives us direction in terms of how we can make a difference and how that difference happens through the grace of God. The first story I want to tell you starts on Monday, January 6th of this year. I had the honor and privilege to go to the Kentucky State Capitol for the inauguration of the constitutional officers. The primary reason that I went was to support church member Michael Adams and his family as Michael was sworn into the office of Kentucky Secretary of State. Now, there were many things that took place that morning that are worthy of conversation, not the least of which is the fact, and you may know this, but having only been in Kentucky for 17 years, I'm still pretty new to the way y'all do things. Everyone who's sworn into a constitutional office in Kentucky has to swear that they've never been a part of a duel, or that they've even been the second in a duel. I kid you not, that part of the oath of office is longer than the other part. Kentucky, y'all are special. I mean, that is really something, and it is in the Constitution, and I was really taken by that. But more than that, and more than anything else, I want to talk about the speeches that were given by three of the people who were there that day. The first was by Governor Andy Beshear. You probably know Andy's a Democrat. The second and third were given by Michael, the Secretary of State, and by the new Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, both of whom are Republicans. And this is what stood out to me in their speeches. All three of those individuals, in their own way, addressed the current polarization that we're facing. They talked about it. And what I liked about that was that they named it. They didn't dance around it. They said this is a reality, and it's a destructive reality, and it needs to change. Every one of them said that. And then in their own way, each one of them talked about the call to move forward. And that the call to move forward means that we got to start doing business differently in politics and in society. And they all really spent some time talking about what that looks like. And that they believed that they have the ability to work together in spite of their differences, and that maybe in so doing, the Commonwealth could show the rest of the country how this is done. Now, maybe it was just the energy of the moment. Maybe it was just the fact that this was a new beginning. Maybe it was the fact that Governor Beshear goes to one of our sister churches right here in town. Did you know the three highest constitutional officers in the state of Kentucky right now are members of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ? The governors at Beargrass, lieutenant governors at Harrisburg, and the Secretary of State's right here at First Christian Church. Not bad for a little bitty frontier denomination, right? Maybe that's part of why I had hope. Maybe part of the reason that I had hope is because I know Michael. I've known him for years. Michael's been an active part of our church. He's been on his board. He's a man of integrity. He says what he means, and he means what he says. And so maybe I believed him. I don't know, but when I left that place, I thought maybe, just maybe, things will change. And then later that evening, after I got off work, I made a terrible mistake. I turned on the national news, and my hope faded. And I thought maybe these were just words. As inspiring as they were and as much hope as they gave me, maybe they're just words. But I clung to it. Thought maybe, just maybe it'll be different this time. And I wondered what would happen. Well, I didn't have to wait very long. On January the 8th, Michael did something that caused kind of a stir in Kentucky. Now, just a little background here. And before I even get to the story, let me make this real clear. I'm about to heap some praise onto Michael Adams. But I want to be very clear that as I do so, I am in no way endorsing him as a politician who is in office or as someone who may seek future political office. I'm not doing that. I'm also not endorsing his policies. That's not what we do as a church, and when I speak on behalf of this church, I do not do those things. We do not take a stand politically on either side of the aisle, and we do not support individual candidates in that way. I am not, please, do not leave church this morning and go home and say, you know what, our pastor was up there endorsing, I can just hear it now, the Democrats, our pastor was up there endorsing a Republican. And the Republicans will be up there like, our pastor was up there endorsing a Republican. Right? Please don't do that. I'm not endorsing a candidate or his policies. I'm endorsing the behaviors of a person who's a friend of mine and who's a member of our church. And that member of our church happens to be the Secretary of State of the Commonwealth. And that's no small thing. And what I want to talk about this morning is, in telling his story, is about how he has been doing what we've been talking about over the course of the past several weeks. And in so doing, it's given me hope. So back to that press conference on January 8th. Michael announces, as he promised to do throughout his campaign, that he was going to work with the Kentucky Senate to pass a law that would require photo IDs to vote. Now, as you know, there's all kinds of energies and tensions around that bill. And there are assumptions being made on both sides of the aisle about the intentions, about those who would support such a bill and those who would oppose such a bill. There's all kinds of energies around this. And those energies, they run hot, right? So shortly after that press conference, Michael was approached in the hallway in front of some TV cameras, which I hear is a politician's favorite way to be approached. That's what I hear. But this person approached Michael and had some very critical things to say, and that's a picture of that moment. It was tense. By every account, it was very tense. That picture got some legs. It got some energy. It was shared quite a bit online. The person talking with Michael is from the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, a grassroots progressive movement here in Kentucky, who is standing in opposition of this bill and has some things to say to Michael as Secretary of State. So that's part of the story. But there's another part of the story. And the second part of the story didn't get told nearly as often as the first part of the story. The second part of the story took place the next day when Michael invited her to come to his office and share in some conversation. Because he wanted to hear from her outside of the lights of the cameras and all that stuff. He just wanted to hear what she had to say and wanted to enter into dialogue with her. After they met, he put out a public statement thanking her for her ideas, for her passion, for her commitment, and for her willing to come and meet with him. He didn't stop there. He reached out and invited the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth to come and speak with him and share their ideas about this bill, their concerns, their worries, just to enter into dialogue. So this is a picture of that meeting. Then he met with representatives from other groups. There's multiple groups around this table. In all, Michael met with the American Civil Liberties Union, the League of Women Voters, Together Frankfurt. All of these groups that he met with lean progressive and stand in opposition of the bill that he's proposing and supporting. Now, the first thing to note is that from those conversations, the bill was changed. There's been some changes made to the bill, some compromises that have taken place that have given some people some peace of mind, and some people have said they're not enough. There's still all kinds of opinions there. But what's equally important, and maybe for me, and especially while I'm telling the story this morning, what's more important than the policy, as I talked with Michael about his experience of having those conversations with people with whom he disagrees so vehemently and who disagree with him. He said that the conversations were detoxifying. That really stuck out to me. I said, tell me more about that. What do you mean detoxifying? And he just talked about the fact that, again, when you go into something like this, regardless of which side of the position that you're on, it's easy to make assumptions about the intentions of the other people. The motivations behind what they're doing. Oh yeah, they're saying this is the motivation, but we all know the real motivation, right? For either supporting or being against. He said that that's just a reality. But when you get together and you actually have conversation and you hear what people are saying and what they're thinking and why they believe the way they believe, you begin not to see them just as issues, you begin to see them as people, and it's really detoxifying, and it turns the temperature down in the room. It doesn't mean we don't disagree with each other, we still disagree with each other. But what it does do is it reduces the likelihood and the temptation to attack each other personally and make assumptions about the other person. And these conversations, they're having an impact. Not long after those meetings, Governor Beshear actually came out publicly and made it very clear that he's not a big fan of this bill. But then stated, in spite of my disagreements with the bill, I do not question the intentions or the motives of the people who are working on the other side. This is about policy. And he voiced his disagreement with policy and the best way to move forward, but refused to attack the integrity of the other people. That's huge. That's big. And again, just to offer the governor some kudos, he extended an invitation to all of the constitutional officers, again, all of whom are Republican, to come to the governor's mansion and spend some time with him in conversation and fellowship. Only one took him up on the offer. Any guesses as to who the one was? Yeah, Michael Adams, the member of our church. Right? Michael's story gives me hope. Michael's story matters. Michael's one of us. He's a person who cares about crossing the other side, and he crossed the other side, and who knows what this Bill's future is, and who knows what's going to happen, and who knows what the future holds. But his story gives me hope, because it's a story of people who disagree vehemently with one another, coming around table, experiencing compromise, but more importantly, experiencing the humanity of the other person. You know we can disagree without dehumanizing each other. And he modeled that. That's just one of the stories that's kind of been keeping me afloat as we've been journeying through this series. Another story that's kind of kept me afloat is one we've already talked about in this series, and that's our church's efforts to cross the divide as we've been working with the Muslim community here in Louisville, learning about their religion, their faith, and the community that we've been working with is predominantly an immigrant community, which is another one of those divides that we've crossed and learned about. And that story gives me hope because it's helping us to form relationship and get to see and understand people for who they are in spite of their different beliefs and how they approach God. I've clung to that story as we've talked about some of the things we've talked about. You know, every week I come into this sanctuary and I look at these pictures on the wall, many of which are stories about church members or partner organizations crossing the divide and bringing healing and hope to groups that experience life and faith and the world differently than we do. Last week, one of our church members told me about a firefighter who was recently recognized for his efforts to cross the divide. Some of the firehouses that he works with are in some immigrant communities, and the immigrants in those communities became distrustful of the firefighters. They were worried that they were working on behalf of the government, and that if they went to rescue them or to be in relationship with them, that the firefighters might ask or find out whether they're documented or not, and then turn them over. And so there was this distrust. And the guy said, that can't be. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to help people regardless of what circumstances that they're in. So you know what he does? He hosts open houses at the fire stations. And he brings in translators specifically to help cross the divide, so that people can come in and ask questions and have their fears relieved and come to know that they're not out to get them. That's how you cross the divide. Last week, one of our board members sent me this remarkable story about a town in eastern Kentucky, a predominantly conservative group of residents of that town who formed a relationship with a predominantly progressive group of people from a town in Massachusetts. And they started traveling to these different locations and getting to know each other and talking to one another. So they're crossing ideological divides, or crossing probably theological divides, or definitely crossing political divides, and they're crossing geographical divides, right? And the purpose was to get to know each other and appreciate each other. And what they discovered is that they didn't just tolerate each other, they grew to love each other. It's such a powerful story that I posted the link to the radio feature of it. It's on today's sermon page. It's about 10 minutes long. It is so good. It's such a powerful example of what it can look like to cross the divide and be in relationship with people who are different. People who have a different approach to things in a way that just gives you hope, right? In the midst of this series just a few weeks ago, I was greatly pleased to open up social media. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with social media. Most days it depresses me, but some days it really inspires me. And on this day, I happened to open it up, and I read a story that's taking place at North Oldham High School, just right up the street. They decided at the middle school, they decided that they saw some divisions in their student body, where kids were being pulled apart, and they were dealing with some of the things that we're dealing with as adults out in the world, and they decided to intervene and bring some healing and hope into that. And so one day during lunch, they took the sixth graders, and they said, you're not going to sit with your normal group today. We're going to assign you to sit with other people that you might not normally sit with. And then, because they know kids are kids and it can be hard to talk to people and they're shy, they set out discussion starters on the table, and counselors sat with them at the tables to kind of encourage them. And they just shared stories. And they just got to know each other. And kids that normally don't sit and eat lunch together sat and ate lunch together. This isn't rocket science. They just pulled these kids together and said, hey, you can be in relationship with people who are different from you, and guess what? Those people that you might think a certain thing about might be pretty special. My understanding is that they have plans to do this with the 7th and 8th graders as well, and that they're following this process up by pulling together teachers and counselors with the kids to talk about their experience and what it meant for them. There are other examples of people crossing the divide and doing things that can give you all kinds of hope. You have to dig for them a little bit. You got to look for them because it's typically not what's at the top of the news article or at the lead at the turn of the hour. But they're out there. People are doing things to make a difference in the world and draw people together. While there are plenty of reasons for us to be concerned and for us to be worried, there are also plenty of reasons for us to celebrate. Just being a part of this church gives me hope. You know what our vision and our mission is. To be a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. And at the heart of that is the practice of an open table where we welcome everyone here without exception. Where we cross every single divide that there may be, and we come together under the grace of Jesus Christ to celebrate that we are of the same body, regardless of our different approach to life and understanding of God and faith and love and all those things. In this church, we do the hard work of saying that as long as you treat other people with dignity and respect and don't dehumanize them with your actions or your language, you have a seat at this table. And you're welcome. And that gives me hope every Sunday that we gather for worship. I want to let you know that our journey's not done. We're wrapping up this series, but our journey's not done. Because you made it clear last fall as we were having our church-wide conversations about who we're going to be in the near-term future and what we're going to do, that you want to dive into these topics and you want to deal with this stuff in a more intentional and lean-in kind of way. So here's how we're going to do that. Next Sunday night, we're training some elders and board members to become facilitators of conversation. They're going to learn how to guide conversation around topics that people might disagree on. And there's going to be facilitators. They're going to be trained specifically to do that, to make sure that when we come together for some conversations that I'm about to tell you about in just a moment, that when we do that, there's going to be someone at the table to make sure that it's an okay place for everyone who's there, right? To give some guidance and some leadership in the midst of that. But here's what we're going to do at those tables and how we're going to get there. Periodically over the course of the next year, and we're going to do it beyond this, but because it's a political year, we're going to kind of focus on some issues that touch on policy and politics. Don't be nervous. I'm going to speaking of breathing in, everybody breathe in. Here's how we're going to do this. Periodically over the course of the next year, we're going to look at what the Bible and what the history of theology has to say about issues that may impact politics and policy. I want to be clear. We're not going to pick a side. We're not going to tell you what to believe. We're not going to tell you how to vote. We're not going to tell you to support. But what we are going to do is what the church should have been doing from the very beginning. Because the church has things to say about the environment. The scriptures have things to say about immigration policy and about social welfare programs. And about foreign policy and all kinds of things. We're going to explore these issues with grace and with humility and with wisdom, and we're going to look and we're going to see what the scriptures have to say about them, and then what you do and how you discern what's in the Bible, that's part of your journey. But you deserve to know what's in there, and you need to know what's in there. And after we do that on Sunday morning, we're going to gather around tables midweek, and we're just going to listen to one another. Why is this issue important to you? Important enough that you'd give up an evening to come and talk with other people about it. Why do you care so much about it? What are your fears? What are you worried about for you and for your kids and for your grandkids? What is it? What are you afraid of? What are your hopes? What do you want to work for? What do you want to do to work forward? What are your hopes? We're not going to debate talking points and policies. Our facilitators are going to shut that down pretty quick because we want you to be informed, but that's not what we're there for that night. We're there to seek understanding from one another. Then after we do that, you're going to share communion with one another at your table. And you're going to be reminded of the thing that draws us together. This is going to be, I am really looking forward to this. It's going to be a really good process and a really good practice for us. And you're going to hear a lot more about it here in just the next few weeks. And I really want to encourage you, if you're able, to come and be a part of it. It's going to be pretty special, I think. And again, it's going to be a model that gives us hope. I want to wrap up with that scripture passage that I was telling you about. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. What can one church, especially a small church like ours, what can one person do to make a difference in the midst of all of this? Well, there's a parable that speaks to that very notion. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. Faith can be like that yeast. The grace of Christ can be like that yeast. It's just a little bit of yeast that leavens the entire loaf. We are meant to be the leaven of the world, to be those who reach out into the world and in small doses offer grace and hope and compassion and care. And Jesus promises that when we do that, that leavening will take hold and it will start to change the world around us. So friends, as we leave this series behind, may we be a people who love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our mind, and with all our soul. And may we love our neighbor as ourselves, even if we perceive them to be our enemy. And no matter where the journey may lead us, remember that we have hope in the grace of Jesus Christ. And hope matters. Amen.